18-year-old Anna couldn't imagine her life getting any better. She was a straight-A student, had a great family, and an amazing boyfriend. She was a very simple girl, not like the others. She'd much rather be playing video games with her boyfriend than hanging out with friends or going to parties. Her boyfriend, Alex, was everything to her. There was no way that she could imagine life without him. The only problem in Anna and Alex's relationship was their distance. Anna lived in West Oklahoma and Alex lived in Florida. Their physical separation was agonizing, but it all made their emotional connection much stronger. They loved each other so greatly. The only term Anna could use to describe him was soulmate. However, there were things about Alex that simply infuriated Anna. His sleeping habits were not of the greatest. Alex and she would stay up late, especially during their summer breaks. Usually up till 3 or 4 in the morning, but eventually Anna would go to sleep. What made her angry was that Alex would never follow in her footsteps. He would always stay up much later, until 8 in the morning or so, but the worst was when he decided he wasn't going to sleep until noon. This angered Anna because that meant that he would sleep till 8 at night. Why couldn't he go to sleep when she did? His choice made their time together lessen. She would be asleep while he was awake, and he would be asleep while she was awake. One Saturday morning, Anna awoke fairly early compared to her normal noon morning. It was around 9:30. She hadn't had a lot of sleep considering the fact that she had crashed at 4. Anna nowhere near expected Alex to be awake, and upon checking her phone, her suspicions were correct. No messages. It didn't bother her. She wasn't expecting him to be. The night before had been a lovely one. After hours of gaming and following hours of lying in bed, Skyping the night had truly been fulfilling. Anna was a bit of a coward, and the comfort of her boyfriend's face and voice kept her company as she lay in bed in the dim light was all she needed to sleep without restlessness. The two lovers had decided that after Anna fell asleep, Alex would end the chat so that her phone would kick back to the Skype homepage, and her phone would lock and get a good night's rest along with her. And they had done just that. Anna did her morning routine and had some breakfast before she checks her Skype history. It read that the chat was ended at 6 in the morning. Alex must have fallen asleep for a while before ending the chat. She shrugs and goes about her day, figuring Alex must have fallen asleep after the chat's end and he would probably wake up around 2 or 3. She deeply missed him while she waited for him to wake up, but she watches TV and plays the game to distract herself. It was until 3:30 when she decided to text him for the first time. Usually she restrains herself so his phone doesn't wake him up. So at 3:34 she sent to Alex, "You're very sleepy today, aren't you?" Of course, no response. She didn't expect one, so she waited a while to send another. 4:46 p.m. "Time to wake up, baby." No response. Again, she wasn't expecting much, so she waits a bit longer until she sends another. 5:28 p.m. "I knew my falling asleep on Skype wasn't a good idea. I kept you up too late making you wait for me." To her frustration, there is once again no answer. Whatever. He must have went to bed later than she had originally thought. She decided to watch a little bit of TV before deciding to go and play games. Upon starting up the game and submerging into her story, her mind begins to wander back to her sleeping boyfriend. She always had an overactive imagination. She hadn't heard from him since last night. What if something was wrong? What if something bad had happened? She began to imagine what it might be like without him, and that scared her. So she quickly sends another message at 8:17 p.m. "I'm getting really worried about you." And to her horror, there was no message. She tried to suppress her mind and focus on her game, but her thoughts were too strong. Her skill in the game began to alter and she died constantly. She tried to concentrate, but She's not worried about it. She's worried about Alex. She feels her thoughts driving deeper and deeper, and she starts to panic even more. 8:25 p.m. Alex, please get up, I'm scared. Nothing. Her thoughts begin to drive her to tears, and within a few minutes, she sent several messages. At 8:33 p.m. I'm crying now. Are you happy? 8:35 p.m. I'm having a serious panic attack. 8:38 p.m. Don't do this to me, you ass. No answer. By then, her stomach is hurting and she is almost positive that she's about to be sick. She feels faint beyond compare. Her mind is swimming with ifs. 8:45 p.m. Wake up! 8:50 p.m. I beg you, Alex, please wake up. 9 o'clock. Please. 9:06 p.m. Wake up. Just please wake up. By then, her pain is radiating through her. She is no longer hysterical. Instead, she is in a calm state filled with pain that she has never felt before. She closes her eyes, trying to relax. Instead, she is sent into a deep nightmare reflecting her fears of Alex's death. She is jerked awake. The clock above the TV says 12 o'clock a.m. exactly. Her phone is lit up, and painting across the screen was the word, one new text message. The chime of it must have been what woke her. Thank the Lord. She whispers frantically as she picks up the phone and quickly looks at the message. From Alex, at 12 o'clock a.m. I love you. Tears fog in her eyes as anger surges inside her. She's been frantic all day, and all he has to say about those messages is, I love you? Forget him. Anna turns her phone off and goes to sleep in anger. And when she awakes the next day and turns her phone back on, there's one voicemail left on her phone. She calls her voicemail and punches in her security code.
One voicemail from
The electronic voice reads off.
Alex, Sunday, June 15th, 2013, at 8:37 a.m.
That bastard better be apologizing, Anna hisses to herself.
Anna?
A female voice says on the recorded message. She sounds shaky and broken.
This is Alex's mom.
She heard a sob.
Alex passed away in his sleep last night.
She began to sob,
I'm so sorry.
and the phone clicks. Anna's body goes rigid. She can't breathe. She can't feel. And everything seems numb. And she collapses. An autopsy of Alex's body shows the cause of death was a brain hemorrhage that caused him to slip into a coma shortly after he went to sleep at 7 a.m. He had stayed in a coma, looking as if he was asleep until 11:58 p.m. when his body gave out. His brain shut down, and he peacefully slipped away.
I used to work at McDonald's several years ago. I worked there for a total of 6 months, and for the most part, I enjoyed it. When I was there, I just worked part-time though, so I'd get like 20 or 30 hours a week. One night, I worked late. Things were pretty quiet for the last few hours, but it had been busy earlier. After I got off of work, I left McDonald's and drove back home. I lived alone in an apartment during this time. It took almost 10 minutes to get back, so it wasn't that far. However, I did have to make several turns. I wasn't really paying that close of attention, but I did notice that the same car drove behind me for most of the way back. When I pulled into my apartment complex parking lot, the car behind me did as well. However, it was a big complex and lots of people lived there, so I wasn't concerned at all. I got out of my car and didn't even notice where the other vehicle had gone. Then I went inside my apartment and was about to shower and change. But before I had a chance to, I heard somebody try opening my apartment door. This caused me to pause where I was and listen. I honestly couldn't believe what I had heard. I mean, nobody ever tried entering my apartment before. Could this have been an accident? Or was somebody actually trying to enter my place? As I stood there, things were silent for a few seconds. I figured that whoever it was gone now, and I decided to walk over to the door. When I got there, I looked through my peephole to the other side, but when I did, I saw this man standing there. He was somewhat tall, with dark hair, and was wearing a sweatshirt. I had no idea who he was. But then I wondered if this was the same person driving home behind me. Maybe they were following me, but I could not think of why. For a moment, I considered answering the door because I was curious, but I quickly decided not to. I kept watching through the peephole, and the man stayed there for a while. He was just looking around, and then finally, he walked away. I was really confused by this. Maybe it was a mistake, but overall, I didn't really think that it was. Well, for the rest of the night, things were fine. I did not see the guy again, and there were no more knocks on my door or anything like that. The next day, I had work again at McDonald's. I was once again working another night shift. Well, a few hours in, things were fairly quiet, and I remember noticing a man walk in. For a second, I didn't think much of it, until I recognized the guy. I realized that it was the same man that had tried entering my apartment the night before. I couldn't believe it. I was working at the register and taking people's orders. However, the man did not come up and order anything. Instead, he immediately turned and walked into the dining room area. I watched him take a seat and was facing me. He did not immediately look at me though. He just appeared to go on his phone, and I tried my best to just ignore him. Over the next hour or so, I looked back to the man several times, and he stayed there. I was confused as to what he was doing. He appeared to be looking at me several times, but I didn't know why. After he was there for maybe 2 hours in total, the man got up and left. He never bought anything and didn't say a word. I was glad that he was gone though. I had maybe an hour left of my shift. It went by pretty good, and then I was off and could go home. I left McDonald's and then headed out to my car. Once inside, I started driving back to my apartment again, and this time, I was paying better attention. I noticed the same car following me back. I realized that this was more than likely the same man, but why was he following me? I went all the way back to my apartment complex, but right before I pulled in, I turned, and the car turned with me. I went around the block, but then decided to actually go to my apartment. The car stayed behind me the entire time. I pulled into the parking lot, and the car followed me and parked in a space not too far away. Once I parked, I got out of my car really fast and started walking for my apartment. When I did, I heard the man leaving his car and footsteps quickly approaching. I looked over and saw the man running towards me at full speed. I just started running like crazy. I went for the door. When I got inside the apartment building, had a maybe 30-foot lead on the guy. Then I ran down the hallway from my door and scrambled to unlock it. As I was doing so, I heard the man running at me. That was one of the most terrifying moments I've ever experienced, but thankfully, I got the door open just in time. Then I slammed it shut behind me and locked it. The guy tried entering, and then started banging on the door when it wouldn't open. I called the police at that point. The guy then walked away, and I thought he was gone for good. But then maybe 5 minutes later, he returned. First, he calmly knocked on the door, but then suddenly started loudly banging on it. I still did not know what this guy's problem with me was. He continued for another minute or two, until the police got there. They started talking to the guy, and I heard some yelling. Eventually, I guess the man tried to run away, but the police caught up with him and he was arrested. After that, I never saw him again. I didn't work at McDonald's for much longer, and I also moved out of that apartment building. To this day, I never found out why the guy was following me. It was really weird and creepy.
A couple years ago, after helping my elderly parents clear out their attic, I came across a box of old photos. I took a break from cleaning and carrying, then sat down on a full box to peruse them. Each page was a goldmine of nostalgia, but the albums I found the most interesting were the ones depicting my parents' childhoods. There was a whole album featuring shots of my mom's side of the family and another featuring my dad's. But as I went through the latter, I noticed something very curious. I always believed that I had one aunt, and that was it. But in the pictures, my father quite clearly had two siblings. At first I thought that it might have been a cousin of his or something, but as I progressed through the album, it became clear that, yes, I had a mystery uncle that I had been completely unaware of for the better part of 4 decades. As you can imagine, my first thought was to ask my mom and dad about it, not in an overly confrontational way, but it wasn't exactly the kind of thing that I was happy to put off until a later date. I wanted to know, and I wanted to know right then and there, but as the saying goes, be careful what you wish for. The mysterious uncle was named Joe, and Uncle Joe had passed away when I was still in diapers, which is why I didn't remember him. He and my dad had been close, as the pictures had shown, but that made me all the more curious as to why he'd never mentioned him. When I brought it up, I immediately detected this contempt for my mom, which stood in contrast to the melancholy of my dad. This was my first big clue that whatever happened, it had been some sudden, random tragedy, or at least there had to be a little more to the story than that. And boy was there ever. One day, Dad drives over to Uncle Joe's to borrow a hacksaw or something. He knocks on the front door and there's no answer, but instead of just driving back empty-handed, he walks into the backyard to let himself in the back door. The back door is open and my dad calls out for Uncle Joe, but again, there's no reply. His truck was in the driveway and his dogs were in the kitchen, so Dad figured that his brother was home, and he was. He was hanging by a necktie in his closet, and my dad was the one that found him. Dad said Uncle Joe was still warm when he found him and he tried CPR to bring him back, but it was no good. After that, he went out to his car, called 911, and just sat there crying until they showed up. I can't imagine how painful that must have been for him. Finding out your brother just took his own life is one thing, but being the one to find him, that's a whole other level of messed up. A lot of folks attended his funeral, all asking why Joe would do something like that because, to everyone that knew him, it was a complete mystery. He had no history of depression or anything like that, and I know some people can hide that stuff really well, so at this point it's almost cliche to say no one saw it coming. But Dad said that in Uncle Joe's case, that cliche applied double. He was a man's man, loved hunting and shooting, but he also wasn't one to bottle up his feelings. If he had a problem or something on his mind, he wasn't afraid to share it, and my dad was usually his first person to call. So as heartbroken and blindsided as everyone was, the worst thing was being plagued by the question of why. But just a few weeks later, Dad gets a call from the county sheriff who asks if he can stop by to have a talk with him. Dad said he had no idea what the sheriff might want to talk about, but wasn't suspicious of anything because they'd been in touch quite often since he found his brother's body. But when he got there and said what he had to say, it changed everything. In the weeks that followed Uncle Joe taking his own life, the local sheriff's department conducted a thorough investigation into the incident. They didn't want to speculate on what might have happened until they had all the available evidence, but once they did, an extremely chilling picture began to emerge, one that was all summed up in Joe's note. As you already know, all Joe did was hang himself in his closet, but according to the note, that's not what he planned to do, as it contained a long-winded apology on why he had to kill his whole family. He hadn't just planned on taking his own life, he had planned on killing my dad, my mom, and me, along with Lord knows who else before he finally decided to check out early. Obviously, Uncle Joe hadn't done that. He hadn't hurt anyone but himself. But there was also no mention or explanation in this note as to why he hadn't followed through with his plan. He'd obviously put some degree of thought into it. All his guns were loaded up and ready to rock, and all the spare ammo that he was packing suggested that he was planning on killing way more people than just me and my parents. But then, for some reason, when it came to actually going through with it, I guess he had second thoughts. Maybe he did what he did as a way of protecting us. I mean, that's what I choose to believe anyway. As for my parents, they don't know what to think, and when it came to that part of the conversation, my dad excused himself and left the room. Mom was still angry, and she said it wasn't at me for bringing it up, but you could tell she'd rather have kept the whole thing buried. If they didn't tell me, I might have gone digging for info myself, and with Uncle Joe's death certificate being up in that attic too, it was only a matter of time before I uncovered it of my own volition. Mom later told me that she gets mad because Dad has the same take that I do, that in a weird way, Uncle Joe is kind of a hero for what he did. It's like he killed the monster who was going to kill us. It's just that monster was him, somewhere inside his own head. I know that's messed up to say because ideally Uncle Joe didn't do any of that stuff and went and got himself whatever help he needed. That's what makes my mom so mad too, is how my dad thinks of Joe as some kind of saint when, on any other day, he's driving over and gunning us down, along with God knows how many other people. But he didn't do that, because whoever planned on killing us, I choose to believe that wasn't my Uncle Joe. I'm not saying it was the devil or anything, but something took control of him, like a bug in a video game or something. His code went all wrong for a second, and when he realized what he was about to do, it scared him so bad that he did what he did, before it could take control of him again. Like I said, in an ideal world, Uncle Joe is still alive, but we don't live in an ideal world, and we gotta take our heroes wherever we can get them. So I guess it's rest in peace, Uncle Joe. I wish I understood what happened to you, but I guess the next best thing is being alive to wonder.
One bizarre thing that happened when I was a kid was a sleepover experience that I had. It was back when I was probably about 8 or 9 years old. I just know that I lived with my parents and older brother in the suburbs. A new family moved into the house across the street and one house to the right. They had a kid who was my age, and I remember meeting him when they first arrived. His name was Jake. There were a few kids in the neighborhood that I would hang out with here and there. Over the first week or two that Jake lived there, I sort of hung out with him like twice. My impression of him was that he was pretty weird. He was kind of rude and didn't seem to like the same things that the other neighborhood kids and I did. There were a few games that we would always play, and I remember that when we invited him, he said that they were dumb. I don't really remember much else, but I just know that I didn't have the best impression of him. Then, one day, my mom told me that Jake was going to have a sleepover with me. I remember thinking, when did I agree to this? I told my mom that I thought he was kind of weird, but she said that he probably was just shy and insecure about moving to a new town. Apparently, Jake's mom asked my mom if he could stay over because she wanted him to make new friends. I'm not sure if he had a hard time making friends or anything, but I reluctantly agreed. So Jake walked over with his mom, and our moms talked for a little while. Jake's mom seemed pretty nice, but Jake really didn't. We went upstairs to my bedroom, and I figured that we could just play video games. I talked to Jake for a while. I don't really remember much of the conversation though. Then we started gaming, and I was feeling a little bit better about him. He was decent at whatever games we played, and we didn't really have to talk much. We could just go on from one game to the next, and it's always nice to have somebody to game with. This was before online gaming was super popular, so multiplayer often meant having to actually have another person there in the room. At whatever time I usually went to bed, we stopped gaming, and Jake had a sleeping bag that he brought with him. Then I got into my bed and the lights went out. The next thing I remember was waking up when it was still dark out. I was like half awake and didn't know what was going on. After opening my eyes though, I noticed Jake standing in my bedroom. He was holding one of the little Nerf footballs that I had. He then walked over to my bedroom window and opened it up. Now, I was just laying there, still squinting my eyes from having just woken up. I didn't say anything or even move. After opening my bedroom window, Jake tossed the ball out of it. Then he walked over and grabbed another ball and tossed that out of the window as well. I really don't know why I just watched him, but my guess is that I was just so confused. That and the fact that I had literally just woken up from a deep sleep. Then Jake walked over and picked up my PlayStation, unhooking the controllers and other wires. I realized that he was probably going to toss that out of the window as well. When he was walking over to the window, I finally spoke up. I asked him what on earth he was doing. He then looked over at me surprised, as if he didn't expect me to wake up. Then he dropped my PlayStation on the ground right there, turned, and then he ran out of my bedroom. I was shocked. I got up and walked out of the room, and then heard our front door to the house opening. He had left the house entirely. I walked down, and then I left the house to see where Jake had gone. When I got out into the front yard, I saw Jake sprinting into his yard and then entering his house. I was really weirded out by this. I went and got my Nerf balls that he dropped out the window. Then I went back inside and went back to bed. The next morning, I told my parents about it, who seemed to be just as confused as I was. We thought that maybe he was sleepwalking or something, but his parents never said anything about it before or after. For about 2 weeks, I didn't see Jake at all. I don't recall seeing his parents outside either. Then, the next time that I saw him was almost just as strange. One night, I was sitting in my bedroom playing video games like I often did. It was warm, so I went to open up my window to get a cool breeze. My window faced out the front yard, and as soon as I looked outside, I saw somebody standing in the front yard. I looked closer and realized that it was Jake. He was just standing there at the end of the front yard by the street, right next to the pine tree, and he appeared to be staring right at me. I kept looking at him for probably 10 seconds. Then, Jake turned and walked away. I didn't know what this kid's problem with me was. I checked out of my window several more times that night, but never saw him again. So, these events took place during the summertime. I was expecting that once the school year came around, he would probably be in my class. But his family ended up moving towards the end of the summer. I never did see him again after that. I still wonder why he acted that way and did those strange things.
Nobody knows what rock bottom truly is until they've hit it. Being abruptly fired from a job that you've worked at for the past 10 years, and then catching your girl cheating on you with your replacement, really makes a man think. Hell, my student loans aren't even paid off yet. What a shit show this life is. After a rather boozy night that consisted of sending out about 4 dozen resumes and horrendously written cover letters, I finally passed out. When I woke up the next morning, I decided to try to at least make some money at home while waiting for an interview. At that moment, I thought that the best way to go about it was completing those internet surveys that yielded $5 Subway gift cards and other shit like that after about an hour of answering questions. I mean, I didn't have any other marketable skills that could have yielded immediate income. It was either that or waste the day away playing computer games. At least, I wouldn't have to pay for food. I did these surveys for about 5 hours before nearly passing out. It was way more excruciating than I originally anticipated. At the end of those 5 hours, I accumulated about $45 in cash and gift cards. $9 an hour. Not like I was making much more than that before. I was about to close my laptop up for the day and head to the bar in an attempt to drown out my melancholy when I saw it. It shouldn't have even been noticeable, but for one reason or another, it was. At the bottom corner of the website that I was on, existed a tiny, singular advertisement. Maybe it was the simplicity that got to me. Plain black letters in a tacky font that read, "Surveys for Cash." Overlapped and completely white background. At least they were direct with the message. One more couldn't hurt, I thought. Might as well scrape together a little bit more booze money before heading out. I sat down, clicked on the picture link, and prepared myself to grind through some more painstaking inquiries. The first 2 questions were simple enough. I guess they weren't really questions, but more like data collection. My name, age, and occupation. I thought it was kind of weird that they asked what my height and weight was, but It wasn't unheard of. The first real question was a different story, though. I must have stared at it, eyes wide and mouth agape, for God knows how long. What the actual hell? In plain English, this is what popped up on my screen. How strong is your urge to currently look behind you? There were 5 options below, ranging from not at all to overwhelming. There was no feasible reason why I should have been afraid at that moment, but I was. I tightened my breathing, trying to make out any subtle noises behind me. There were none, and after about maybe 5 minutes, I worked up the courage to look. There was nothing. I sighed in relief and scoffed at myself at the same time. This must have been some kind of a joke. However, I decided to entertain it, answering neutral and clicking on to the next question. And that's when I read, "Why would you look behind you?" I smirked. Funny, because simply typing in "I don't know" in the response box and once again clicking next. And this was the third question. You're on a plane. Apart from you, there is only one other passenger who is sitting somewhere behind you. At some point, you get up to go to the washroom and find that the man is gone. You check to see if he is in the only bathroom on the plane, but he isn't. What do you do? Again, I must have stupidly stared at it for at least nearly 10 minutes. Was this some kind of obscure personality test? I mean, it must have been, right? Right? I put in the same answer that I used for the last question. I don't know. It was true. I didn't know. How was I supposed to answer that kind of shit, you know? I clicked next again, now more intrigued than anything. The fourth question went on like this. You wake up in woods unfamiliar to you. It's nighttime, and the moonlight provides you with only slight visibility. About 30 feet away from you, there's a small, dimly illuminated cabin. The door is open, and a smiling woman is motioning for you to come in. Do you go? Explain why. This question wasn't necessarily weirder than the last one, so my conjecture that this was some kind of odd personality test was still feasible. I actually made an attempt to answer this one, something along the lines of go into the cabin because there simply wasn't nowhere else to go. Once again, I clicked next, which I probably shouldn't have. The questions started getting more fucked up. They weren't too gory or explicit, not anything like that. They were just stranger, weirder, more psychologically disturbing. If you're wondering why the hell I kept going on, I can't really give you an explicit answer to that. I just feel like I had to. It was esoteric, a creeping sensation that I can't quite explain away. But I could never shake it, so I just went on. Some of the questions that stood out were, suppose that you wake up one night to find an elevator in your house. During every midnight after that, it opens up for 5 minutes, revealing an exact copy of yourself that gets progressively more injured as time goes on. Do you keep living like this? Or do you enter the elevator once and end it all? And you're in a hotel room, but you are awoken by a rapid knocking on your window. You peek through the blinds, seeing what appears to be a man missing both of his eyes. He puts his mouth to the glass and tells you to kill the woman in the bathroom immediately. Do you listen to him? This one was one of my favorites. You are watching home movies with your mother. One of the tapes include footage of her being murdered by a masked intruder. Your mother simply laughs at the footage without saying anything. In your opinion, is this cause for concern? In addition to this insanity-induced shit, there were some rather disconcerting events happening in real life as well. I received a knock on the door about 30 minutes in. I looked through the peephole to find a guy staring there, frantically shaking his head and mouthing no, while making direct eye contact with me. He looked terrified. Obviously, I didn't open the door. I received about 10 phone calls from somebody named The Auditor on my caller ID. They left a message every time, but each time was just a recording that consisted of somebody saying numbers through heavy static. Actually, It sounded more like screaming now that I'm thinking about it. About an hour into the thing, I was on the verge of a mental breakdown. I was petrified of looking behind me, even though there was no indication that anything should have been there. I heard soft scratching come from my vent at one point, so I moved my couch over it. Eventually, I reached what appeared to be the end of the survey. However, it wasn't a question. It was simply a statement. Don't let them in. They're not to be trusted. Almost as if it were on cue, I heard more knocking on my door about 5 seconds after reading this. As slowly and silently as I could, I moved over and looked through the peephole once again. It was a different person than the one that I'd seen earlier. She was a woman, looking to be in her mid-20s. She was wearing a thick blazer despite it being around 90 Fahrenheit outside. She was also wearing sunglasses, so I could never really tell where she was actually looking. She eventually took a piece of paper out of her pocket and slipped it under the door. I looked down and read it. It's lying. Leave your apartment immediately. It's been about a half hour since. I can't bring myself to look at the computer screen nor at the woman outside. She's still there. I can see the shadows of her feet from underneath my door. I heard my bedroom window open a few minutes ago, but I've since jammed the door shut with a chair. I can hear some sort of distorted muttering coming from behind it now. Maybe rock bottom wasn't so bad. But what am I supposed to do here?
I live by myself in an apartment. My unit is on the first floor of a pretty new building, and I've lived here for 2 years now. Last year, though, something really strange happened. It was nighttime, and I was in the living room of my apartment. I think it was maybe 8 p.m. or so. There was then a knock at my front door. I didn't know who it would be, but I got up to go check anyways. When I arrived at the door, I looked out, and no one was there. This was really weird. I opened up my apartment door and looked out into the hallway. When I did, I still saw no one, but there was a McDonald's bag right in front of the door. At first, I thought this had to be a mistake. Maybe it was DoorDash or something, and they left it at the wrong door. I picked it up and looked at it, but didn't see any kind of receipt or anything indicating who it was for. There was no name or anything. I looked inside the bag, and there appeared to be just one burger inside. I wasn't really sure what to do, but it didn't seem to be a DoorDash. Maybe one of my friends did this for some reason. I really wasn't sure, but I was hungry, so I had the burger. After that, I told a couple of my friends about it, the only ones that would possibly do something like that, but they all denied it, so I was really confused. I thought maybe it was sent to the wrong address. Well, several nights later, basically the same thing happened. Once more, there was a knock at my front door. This time, it was later at night though. I think it was almost 11 o'clock. I went to the door again, and nobody was there, but there was another McDonald's bag right outside. I looked inside of it again, and it appeared to be just one hamburger like it was before. This was really confusing, but this time, I left the bag there. Maybe on the chance that it was a mistake somebody would see. The next day though, the bag was still there. Eventually, I had to throw it away, and sadly the burger went to waste, so I didn't feel guilty for eating the other one. But I was really confused as to why I kept getting these McDonald's deliveries. A few days went by of nothing. Then I got another one. Once more, I was at home, and it was sometime at night. It was maybe 9 or 10 o'clock, and there was another knock on the door. As soon as I heard it, I got up and ran for the front door. By the time I arrived though, the person was gone, like every other time. I opened up the door and looked out into the hallway, but didn't see anybody. At that point, I looked down, and of course, there was another McDonald's bag. I brought it in and opened it up, but there was no food in the bag at all this time. The only thing inside was a standard-sized piece of paper, and on the paper was a printed photograph of me. It was the exact picture of myself that I had on my LinkedIn page. I thought this was the weirdest thing ever. I had absolutely no idea who was doing this or why. For the next few days, I was on edge at night, waiting for a person to knock on the door again, but they never did. And since that happened, I haven't received any more strange deliveries or had any more knocks on my door. I still don't know how to explain it.
I was working late at the office one night. We have a big 2-story building in a business complex, and sometimes if we have to catch up on work, we kind of have to stay late. I had taken 2 sick days the week before, so I really had to get my project done and didn't have much time left to do it. I planned to stay a few hours this night and a few hours the next night to get caught up, leaving anywhere between 1 and 2 a.m. Often others would be there late as well, but this night it was just me. I was working at my desk, which was in the middle of a whole room full of desks. As I typed away on my laptop though, I started to get a little drowsy, and after fighting it for a bit, I got up to make some coffee in the break room. I started the machine and leaned against the table, barely keeping my eyes open as it slowly poured into the mug. But a sudden thud shook me awake. It sounded like it was downstairs, but it was really loud, resonating through the whole building. Nothing followed the sound though, it was just the one thump. I walked over to the doorway and looked out at the stairs, debating whether or not to see what it was. Honestly, I was so tired, I thought it had to just be something falling in one of the rooms downstairs, and chose to not investigate. I grabbed my mug and went back to my desk, continuing to work. I sat there for an hour, non-stop working, but the coffee really wasn't fixing my sleepiness problem. I kept working though, trying to power through it, but I was only prolonging the inevitable. At some point, I dozed off at my desk. When my eyes opened, I remember being immediately irritated and somewhat dizzy, like I'd been annoyingly woken up from a deep sleep. As I regained my senses though, I noticed a sound coming from somewhere in the building. It was a beep, sounding every 4 or 5 seconds, but was very faint. I looked at my laptop, seeing it was nearly 2 a.m. I decided it wasn't worth trying to work anymore, so I packed up my things and brought them with me as I left the room, to both check on the beeping and to leave afterwards. As I got to the stairwell though, the beeping started to make me nervous. I'd never heard it before, and there was something eerie about it. Maybe I was too tired before to fully comprehend it. I walked down the staircase, and now with the beeping much louder, I peered into the long main hallway. At the far end, there was a metal rod laying on the ground, right in front of the open entrance door. I felt blood rush from my face, knowing it should be locked up, and realizing the beeping was from the building security system. With nothing but instinct to go off of, I ran down to the opposite end of the hallway and out the back door, getting in my car to call for help. Although I was out of the building, what I learned next was far more terrifying. Police pulled in and searched around, not finding anyone or anything, and that's when we checked the security cameras. At 11 p.m., a man could be seen walking up and breaking the door open with a single hit from some kind of tool, creating the bang sound that I heard while getting coffee. He then quietly moved around the first floor and up to the second, where he came into the office I was in and stood quietly only a few feet behind me while I was working at my desk. He then went back downstairs, coming up again while I was sleeping and walking around the whole office, even going right up to me and searching around my desk. It's not clear if he stole anything, as there weren't cameras in every room, but there didn't seem to be any obvious answer as to what he was doing there. After seeing the security tapes though, I've never stayed alone at that office again.
After my dad passed away, my wife and I moved my mom in with us, and she got to spend her last few years in the comfort of family. We couldn't afford a home, but even if we did have the money, she'd never have accepted living in one. The way she saw it, selling the house and saving on retirement home money meant more cash towards our kids' college fund. But first, I'd have to clean the place out, do a little redecorating, then put the place on the market. And so one day, I went over to the house to start clearing it out. I started with the ground floors, made my way to the second, and then finally, I was faced with clearing out the attic. But then as I was doing so, I realized a lot of the stuff up there amounted to a chronicling of my family history. There were all kinds of photo albums, mementos from Hawaiian vacations, and then a whole folder stuffed with pieces of paperwork like birth and death certificates. And that's how I found out my last name was not actually my last name, and that at some point, my parents had gone about changing the name of our family. From what I could tell, this all took place when I was 4 years old, so it was no wonder I had no memory of it. But then, as you can imagine, I was intensely curious as to why this name change took place, so the first chance I got, I asked my mom about it. I already figured that the reason a whole family might change their name probably wasn't a good one. We'd been either running from something or hiding something, or probably a combination of the two. So when I put aside the time to actually sit down with Mom, show her the paperwork, and ask why our family changed its name, I knew it wasn't going to be an easy 2-minute explanation. The kids were at school, my wife was at work, and Mom was watching TV in our living room. Then, in as delicate a manner as possible, I asked my mom if we could talk, and then showed her the paperwork that proved that she and my dad had changed our family name. I'd expected some kind of emotional reaction, but instead, Mom acted resigned to my question. She knew that I'd probably find the paperwork during the process of clearing their home, which for the record wasn't the same one that I grew up in. The thought had occurred to her, and it had panicked her at first, but since the events in question were more than 40 years old, it was always an inevitability that I'd find out in some way. She figured then would be as good a time as ever. Mom explained that I had an uncle that I'd never been aware of, one who died when I was still in diapers. The circumstances of his death had caused a great scandal, so to avoid being harangued by journalists and vigilante types, my parents decided to change our name, then moved across the country to begin a new life. I think Mom tried to avoid telling me what I actually wanted to know. It was like watching her taking bites out of each side of a devil dog, carefully scraping away the cake part, too scared to get to what holds it all together. I had to ask her directly to get her to tell me, and this, in so many words, is what she said in return. My paternal uncle and my future aunt by marriage met while they were in college. They had an on-again, off-again relationship, and apparently my father believed it was doomed. But then suddenly, and inexplicably, they announced that they were engaged. Again, my dad thought that they'd eventually just break it off. They weren't a good fit, and it seemed only a matter of time before they broke things off for good. But then when it came to the wedding, my dad said that he slowly realized what his brother saw in his new bride. Her family were very rich. From what Mom said, they were old and new money. All their cash came down from way before, and they'd invested it wisely, and it showed. Mom said they owned a chain of canning factories or something, and this is back when canning was a much bigger industry. So in short, they were loaded. Dad knew it was a bad idea to marry for money, but my uncle wouldn't listen, and he and his bride were married in a lavish ceremony at some country estate. The first few months lived up to the term honeymoon period. But after that, it was back to business as usual. There were fights, talk of annulment and divorce, but still the couple went on, and with my uncle having become accustomed to a certain lifestyle, he wasn't willing to give up easily. And then came the accident. My aunt and uncle had been out hiking when my aunt had apparently taken a nasty fall. She was rushed to the hospital with life-threatening injuries, and the doctors managed to save her life, but after the surgery, our family got the bad news. She would never walk again and was unlikely to regain the use of her arms. She proved the doctors wrong on the second part. Well, half wrong in that she regained the use of one of her arms, but she was confined to a wheelchair for the rest of her life. Mom and Dad noticed that my uncle was acting strangely in the aftermath of the accident, but I mean, who wouldn't? Even if their relationship was rocky, he still loved his wife in some capacity. At least my parents thought so. So it was only natural that my uncle wasn't in a good place following the accident. They had to remodel their house, the prospect of children was pretty much off the table, and it was a terrible transitionary time, but everyone adjusted. Or so they thought. One day, my dad gets a call from my grandpa who had some more bad news. My uncle was dead, and so was my aunt. Both had taken their own lives. Obviously, this was incredibly shocking news, but that wasn't all of it. As things progressed, the family got more and more info, learning that my uncle had hung himself first before my aunt had overdosed on pills. And before she did, she left a note. Only my father and grandfather actually read it, and as far as I know, it's back in some evidence file someplace if it's not already been destroyed. But what it said was even more shocking than the acts that immediately surrounded its writing. Basically, my aunt's accident wasn't an accident. My uncle had pushed her. They had an argument, and she hit him, and he shoved her. She fell back way further than he'd intended to shove her, then down the rocky hillside she went, never to fully recover. I guess my uncle could have just finished her off there and then, but he didn't, and she never breathed a word of the shove to the police. Instead, my aunt pretended to let bygones be bygones. I don't know how she pulled it off, but she did, when in reality, she was intent on revenge. All the letter said was that she wore him down until he did it, and God knows what the hell that entailed exactly. But I imagine she played a lot on his guilt and how he was trapped with her, whatever hurt the most, until finally he just couldn't take it anymore. Obviously, there were no arrests or anything, but boy did the media want to know all about my uncle and his relationship with my aunt. And to get answers, they sought out my dad. All the unwanted attention was really bad for our family, and apparently some people got it into their heads that my dad was somehow in on it. They vandalized the house while I was sleeping in my crib, and after that, Dad started looking at jobs and houses out of state, as well as looking at a potential change of name. Mom said they planned on telling me when I was ready, but then who the hell decides when that is? They put it off until eventually they decided it was just best to keep it a secret. They feared the bombshell might upset the progress myself and my siblings were making in life, and that's on top of the fact that they just didn't want to revisit such a painful period of our lives. I actually get it too. I don't know how I'd have handled that kind of burden personally, but I give them a solid 8 out of 10 for their own execution. Finding out as a grown adult was traumatic, so I can only imagine how I'd have reacted if they told me at age 15 or 18 or even 21. It's definitely something that I still think about from time to time, but frankly, the fact that I can view it as almost like an unrelated third party, it sort of feels like a privilege at this point. It's messed up and it hurts to think about, but not nearly as much as it would if I had to grow up with it stuck in my head. In that sense, I understand why my parents kept it a secret from me. Heck, I pretty much endorse and applaud it at this point. Sometimes, secrets need to be kept because at a certain age, uncomfortable, unpalatable, or incomprehensible truths can be just as wounding as a knife or bullet. I see it everywhere. Kids who grow up knowing too much too soon. They're old before their time in a way, and it's something they carry with them into adulthood. But I didn't have to carry anything with me. I never had any kind of mental burden forced upon me. My parents did the opposite. They shielded me from it, and for that, I'm very grateful.
This is something that happened back in 2003. For some background details, I'm a female and was 12 years old at the time. I had a group of friends that I went to school with, and we would hang out together all the time. So one time, I remember I was at my friend Jen's house with a couple of other friends. There were maybe 4 or 5 of us. We were all going to be staying over for the night at Jen's. I remember that her parents' house was really nice, and they had this big living room. That's where we were going to sleep, and we all had sleeping bags other than whoever would sleep on the couch. So I remember that we were hanging out, and as it got late, we were just watching TV and movies. Everyone else had gone to bed besides us by probably 11 o'clock. Now, I remember that a little while after that, another friend, Alyssa, that was with us, went to the kitchen. The kitchen was next to the dining room, which was directly next to the living room. Alyssa suddenly came back into the living room really fast, and she said that she saw a man in the window in the kitchen. At first, we thought that she had to be joking with us. I mean, it just seemed really unlikely. But Alyssa insisted that she was not joking, and I thought that either she was serious or a really good actor. She was telling us that she saw a guy walking past the window and then kind of look in at her. One of the lights in the kitchen was on, but it was dim. Outside, it was completely dark, so it would have been difficult to see any details about the man. After a small discussion in the living room, basically all of us went into the kitchen and looked. By now, there was nothing. No one was there. We then gathered back in the living room and talked about it some more. We were trying to figure out why somebody would be in the backyard. Jen said that she wasn't aware of anything like that happening before. Eventually, we just continued on what we were doing. I think we all figured it was maybe a neighbor cutting through the backyard or something. And probably a couple of hours went by. By about 1 o'clock in the morning, we were starting to get tired and going to go to sleep soon. I remember that I was thirsty and I went into the kitchen to get some water. Right when I walked in, I noticed through the back window there was a guy right there. I really couldn't believe it at first. He appeared to be looking in and was maybe a foot or two away from the window, but I really couldn't tell any details about what he looked like or anything. I immediately ran back into the living room and told everyone. At once, I think everybody got up and started running through the dining room to the kitchen. But again, when we got there, the man was gone. We looked out of the windows of the dining room, kitchen, and even the window in the living room, but did not see anybody. We stayed up for at least another hour talking about it. Finally, though, we were convinced that the man was gone for good this time. Everybody went to bed, including myself. We all woke up the next morning, and Jen's parents were making breakfast in the kitchen. I remember that we went in there to get something to eat. As a few of us were sitting around talking and eating, Jen's dad went outside to the patio from the kitchen. I'm not sure where he was going, but when he came back inside, he said that there were a bunch of marks at the back door. It was as if somebody was trying to get inside. So for the next few minutes after that, we were all talking about the man that we had seen. It seems as though he tried breaking in, but luckily he didn't. I used to work at McDonald's for a short time when I was younger. I worked at the McDonald's near where I lived, and most of the times I would be a cashier. So one night I was working until 10 o'clock. Earlier in the evening, things got really busy. There was a lot of people coming in at around 5 p.m. Now, I had just recently started for the night at that time, and I was working at the front counter taking orders. I remember that a man walked up to me, already looking angry about something. When he got up to me, he said that his order was messed up and he wanted another one for free. Now, he didn't have any food with him, and I asked him if he had a receipt. The guy said no to this as well. So I asked him where the food was, and he said that he threw it away because it was wrong. Then he demanded us again to remake the order, and said that he also wanted a gift card for the trouble. I asked the guy when he came in and ordered the food that we messed up. I had only been working for like 20 or 30 minutes, but I hadn't seen this guy. I was guessing that he ordered before I was here, maybe. The man wouldn't tell me when, though. He just said earlier. I asked him to specify, and he refused. Without any information, he could have easily just been trying to get free food, and I had a feeling that's exactly what he was doing. He started getting more angry, though. When he raised his voice, I told him to leave. Another one of my coworkers also noticed when the guy was getting angry, and he came over to us. At that point, the angry man got my name, and then claimed that he was going to report me to corporate. I didn't really care, though. I didn't think he actually would, and even if he did, I hadn't done anything wrong. Finally, the man stormed out of the restaurant. I told my coworker about the situation, and I was told that the guy was completely wrong for acting that way. It made me feel a little better to hear that. We were pretty busy, so I got back to work with helping customers, and soon I had mostly forgotten about the interaction. When it was later that night, though, things quieted down significantly. By about 9 o'clock, I was finally almost done. We weren't getting customers nearly as often, but I was still working behind the front counter. I remember at that point, I noticed a man walk in. It was the same guy who had been yelling at me before, and he seemed just as angry, if not more. He walked right up to me, and before I had a chance to say anything, he started cursing me out. I remember telling him to leave, but he just completely ignored me. He was going on what could be considered a legendary rant. After yelling at me for a minute or so, he then walked around and started to go behind the counter. This was obviously for employees only. And at that time, because of how quiet we were, I was the only employee behind the counter. When the man got back there, he started walking in my direction. I yelled at him to leave, which a coworker in the kitchen area overheard. I was afraid that the man was going to attack me or something. But instead, he grabbed a bunch of cups and then slammed them to the floor. By that point, my coworker arrived at the scene and also tried telling the guy to leave. It was really no use though. The guy then went over and punched one of the computers that we had. He then basically started picking everything and anything up that he could reach and slamming it to the ground. My coworker told me to call the police, so I got out my phone and hit 911. The man then walked out from behind the counter and walked over to the drink machine. He took a bunch of the things over there, such as straws and ketchup packets, and started tossing them around. Then the guy said a couple more curse words, took a chair and flipped it over, and then finally left. After he was gone, I was on the phone with the police. They arrived a short time later, but the man was gone. We had a video of him though from security footage, which we turned over to them. I got off work and left after that, and my manager handled the rest. I'm not really sure what ended up happening. I assumed that the man got banned from the McDonald's location. I only worked there for a couple more months, and I never saw him again. He was by far the worst customer that I ever encountered though. This happened one time when I was sleeping over at a friend's house. I think I was about 10 or so. I had a really good friend named Jordan back then, and I would go to his house sometimes to hang out. A few times I stayed overnight, and he lived pretty close to me. So I remember that one time when I went over to sleep over at his house, we were outside in the early afternoon. He lived in a pretty quiet neighborhood for the most part, but there were a lot of other houses nearby. Jordan's yard was fairly big, so we were outside playing some kind of sport. I remember that he had a neighbor directly across the street. The neighbor was a man who was somewhat thin and had kind of blonde, messy hair. I remember that when we were outside, the guy was just kind of standing around in his front yard and looking in our direction. Jordan told me that the guy always seemed odd to him. I didn't really ask why or anything. At least I don't remember. So I remember that the guy almost appeared to be watching us, which was strange. We moved into the backyard after that because he was kind of creeping us out, but it seemed like that sort of behavior was kind of normal for the guy. So eventually we went back inside, and were probably playing video games for the rest of the time. I just remember that when we went to bed, I was sleeping on the floor in my sleeping bag. I fell asleep rather quickly, but was awoken sometime in the night. I remember being wide awake when I woke up, so I just started looking around. Everything was dark and completely silent. The only noise was the sound of a highway getting an occasional vehicle off in the distance. I'm really not sure what time it was, but probably like 1 o'clock in the morning if I had to guess. Then I suddenly heard the sound of somebody walking inside of the house. It was like there was footsteps somewhere on the first floor. This immediately seemed odd to me. Things had been so quiet, and I knew Jordan's parents and sister had long gone to bed. I was hoping that maybe it was one of them. Then I heard the footsteps coming up the stairs and headed for the hallway that Jordan's bedroom was in. Jordan's room was at the very end of the hallway, so I could see the top of the stairs from where I was. As I was looking over, I soon saw a man walking up. He was moving pretty slowly, but I soon recognized that it was Jordan's neighbor from across the street. As soon as I saw this, I knew that I had to do something. Jordan's door had been open for some reason, and I quickly left my sleeping bag, ran over to the door, and closed it. I then realized that there was actually a lock on his door, so I locked it. I heard the man walking down the hallway on the other side, and he seemed to be making a beeline for Jordan's room. I went over to Jordan's bed and shook him to wake him up. I then told him that I saw his neighbor inside the house. It was at about this time that the neighbor guy tried opening Jordan's bedroom door. With it being locked, it wouldn't open. Jordan was immediately just as scared as I was. We really didn't know what to do. There was no phone in Jordan's room, so we couldn't call the police. After trying the door a couple of times, the man stopped, and things were quiet for a few moments, but we did not hear him walk away. Then we heard this noise at the door. It sounded like the neighbor guy was perhaps trying to pick the lock on it. At least, that's what we both thought. He didn't have a key, but the door almost sounded like it was trying to be unlocked. At that point, Jordan just started yelling loudly. He started yelling for the man to leave, and also yelling to call the police, and I then joined in after him. Hopefully his parents would hear, and they had a phone in their bedroom. We were yelling that there was a man in the house and stuff. When this happened, not only did the noises at the door stop, but we then heard the guy starting to move away. Shortly after, we heard Jordan's parents get up, and a door to the house opened and closed. Jordan's parents came to his room and asked us what happened. When we told them, they of course called the police. The man had left and was not at his house when the police arrived. We talked with the police for a while and let them know everything that happened. Well, the next day I got picked up by my mom, and I heard from Jordan later on in the day that the police had arrested the man. That made us both feel a lot better. That was by far my craziest sleepover experience that I've ever had. This happened back when I was a kid. I was 12, and my best friend Ryan came over one Friday to sleep over. We would both hang out all the time. On this day in particular, he came over after school. That night, my parents and sister were gone at her soccer game until later, so it was just Ryan and I at the house. We were playing video games in the living room for most of the time. At probably like 8 p.m., there was a knock on the front door. It was really strange because we hardly ever had people knocking on our door. I paused the game and looked to the window. I couldn't see who was at the door from there, so I got up and walked over. Then I checked out of the living room window. There was some random guy there, and I had no idea as to who he was. I didn't get a very good look at him, but enough to tell that I didn't know him. He seemed a little bit sketchy too, so I chose not to answer it. I went back over to the TV, and Ryan and I continued gaming. The guy knocked at the door once more, but we still didn't bother to answer it. We hoped that he would go away and not stay there. Several minutes later, we hadn't heard anything, so I went over to the window to check. When I did, the man was gone. So after that, we figured that that was the end of it. Soon enough, Ryan's parents and sister got home. Ryan and I just kept playing video games, and we ended up staying up later than everybody else. So I remember that the later it got, the quieter things became, other than the TV. I don't know exactly what time it was, but we heard this noise coming from outside by the window. We both turned around at the same time to look. When we did, we saw this man at the window. It appeared to be the guy who had been at the door earlier. When we saw this, Ryan and I both sprinted out of the living room for my bedroom. When we went inside, literally right after that, we heard the sound of glass breaking coming from the living room. It sounded like the man had broken into the house. We locked the bedroom door, and luckily I did have a phone in there. We called the police, and I could hear the man just for a moment inside of the house. But things got really quiet after that. He didn't seem to go anywhere near the hallway where the bedrooms were. The police were fast to arrive, and got there only about 5 minutes later. The next thing that I knew, they were inside of the house. My parents and sister got up from the commotion. When Ryan and I came out of my room, there were multiple cops in the house speaking with my parents. I found out that the man had been inside and was arrested. He was located hiding behind the living room couch. It was a crazy night, but after that, things were fine. Of course, we had to get the living room window replaced. I'm not really sure what the man was after or why he chose to break into our house. I really can't believe that he broke in. I'm glad that Ryan and I were able to get to my room and then call the police when we did.
Not really sure how to begin this, and my title may make more sense after reading my experience. I'll try to be as brief and concise as possible. It was the summer of 2004. My family was supposed to vacation in Kennebunkport, Maine. My father was stuck in meetings, so he was going to come up from Manhattan a few days after us. My mother wanted to drive up, which super annoyed me at the time, but we didn't have much of a choice, so me, my brother, and my sister loaded up into the car and started that drive. I was about 14 at the time of this story. The drive itself was uneventful, but there were various delays and we ended up getting a lot later than we originally planned. Because of this, the owners of the house we were renting had turned in for the night, and we weren't able to get a hold of them to get the keys to get inside. It sounds like horrible planning, but apparently they were pretty strict about the time frame to pick up the keys. My mom, who was unfazed, decided that she wanted lobster, so we all went to one of our favorite spots. She called my dad to see if he can make reservations at a hotel in Kennebunkport from New York while we ate. We were just enjoying the lobster while a guy came up and started chatting with my mom. I figured it was just a friendly local making conversation. During this, my dad calls my mom, and my mom excuses herself to speak to him. Apparently, all hotels were booked for the night. Go figure. A height of the vacation season in Kennebunkport. The plan was for us to drive to the nearest town and just find somewhere to stay until we picked up the keys for our vacation home. Apparently that local had been listening to my mom's conversation and came back over once she got off the phone. I want to say first that there was nothing outwardly off about this guy. He was preppy, clean cut, unassuming, and fit in with the clientele. He told my mom that he had a big home with a big guest house we were more than welcome to stay with. His wife wouldn't mind. Immediately, my reaction was like, F that. No way in the world I was staying at a random dude's house in creepy Maine in the dark. My mom, doing her due diligence, determined that this guy was legit. He said he was in finance, and my mom was an investment banker. They chatted long enough for my mom to determine that he wasn't totally full of it. I called my dad hysterical. He said that I was overreacting and that I needed to get out of the city more and just accept that sometimes people are just nice. So my brother, sister, and I got into our car and followed this man back to his house. The guest house was really nice, fully furnished, but the beds were oddly placed. The guest house had 2 bedrooms, and instead of the beds being located in the middle or center, they were right under each window. It just seemed out of place. So anyway, fast forward. We're all getting ready for bed, and my mom hears a knock on the door, and it's that guy. He said he just wanted to check to make sure we got all settled in. Cool. Nice thing to do, I guess. Then about 30 minutes later, he comes back to check in again. At this point, my mom was like, thanks, we're good. We'll stop by in the house in the morning to say thank you, etc. Fast forward another 30 to 45 minutes. I can't sleep. I'm terrified. We hear this rustling, which is odd because the guest house was nowhere near any trees or even close proximity to bushes that might cause such a noise. At this point, I see my mom wide awake, look up out the window, like motioning towards the window with her eyes. Let me add, none of the windows had curtains. The guy said it's because his wife was in the process of redecorating. When I looked up there was a male figure just standing. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I don't know how long he was standing there for. When he walked away, my mom waited a bit, then told us to get our stuff together. She wasn't messing around. We had my dad on the phone at this point. He was pretty much flipping out at my mom about something, but I didn't hear what. My mom said she was going to go put the stuff in the car and to follow her out. This was all around 2 a.m. When we got into the car, we pulled around to the front of the main house, so my mom could return to the key and say thanks and just get out of there. However, when we got to the front, all the lights were off. Not just all the lights, but it looked like no one had been home. Porch light, table lamp in the front windows, everything black. Also, the 2 cars were gone, and which we presumed to be his wife's car. After seeing this, my mom at this point was pretty unsettled. She said that we were just going to leave and proceeded to drive to the gate. The gate at the end of the driveway had been deadbolted and padlocked shut from the inside. It wasn't a super strong gate, so my dad just told her to rev it. Thankfully, we were in a big SUV and just got out of there. We drove straight back to New York City, not speaking the entire time, and we have never returned back to Maine. My parents still refuse to speak about it to this day. I ended up asking a family member about it one night when he was drunk, and he said, "Oh, they didn't tell you?" The actual owners of that house were on vacation. I'm assuming my mom or dad followed up with one of the local authorities and figured that out, but never told us that. I don't know who that man was, or what he was planning that evening. I was curious as to whether there were any known serial killers or murderers who were in that area at the time, whether traveling through or whatever.
As drops of rain were pouring on my window, I was browsing the internet and watching videos. The storm outside was getting heavier, and the sound of rain kind of freaked me out. As the thunder began to boom, the Wi-Fi connection died. I had no internet now. What a terrible night. This is going to be one boring night, I told myself. While I was searching for old photos on my computer, an activity which seemed to be the only way to have fun, my laptop just shut down. The screen went black, and that was it. Later on, I managed to turn it on again, after I removed the hard disk and saw that there was no problem with it. Windows started as normal, then the desktop popped up. I remember having all sorts of games and folders on my desktop, but now they were all gone. I thought that the problem that caused it was due to the shutdown, which had also damaged my files and memory. I was in a rage now, because I had lost lots of important work for school now due to this shit laptop. I did a final check to see if everything had been really deleted. As I was browsing through folders, I found a strange file name. Kevin's Clip. I have never saved that to my computer. I thought it was some kind of prank. But I clicked on it and it opened. Weird. Now there was this opening scene with a close shot of a field, with colored flowers on it. Then the camera zoomed out and I could see a kid, about 8 or something. Long dark hair, blue eyes. I was so confused I couldn't say he was cute or creepy anymore. He ran onto the field and he kept smiling. He wasn't even blinking. For 30 seconds or so he just smiled and ran forward. And then he suddenly stopped. The scene cut out to a place in front of the child, like a small deck. There were 4 chairs, and on each of them was a person. I could see their faces. They were smiling, with the same absent look as the child before. I didn't get this until the camera zoomed out on each of them and I could see their entire bodies. The first one, a woman, was shot. A bullet in the head. Blood was flowing down her face. The other ones were also dead, but the last one caught my attention. He had the same blue eyes as the child in the field. He had the same dark hair. He had to be related to the child. Then the shot switched to their feet. Next to each there was a cardboard sign on which was written, Mom, Brother, Sister, and the last one was Daddy, just as I expected. The son of killed this family. Then I heard a voice behind the camera, laughing. It was a sick man's laugh, a twisted mix of sobbing and crooked laughing. And I was terrified now. The video was just sick. The final frames were of a child, staring at me and smiling, of course. The camera was shaking and then the kid stabbed the person who was filming with a kitchen knife or something. Blood started to flow and the camera dropped, but it was still filming. There was another chair on the wooden deck. The kid sat on it and a distorted reverse violin started to play. He smiled at the camera on the ground, and then with a knife, giggling. Blood covered the camera and the music stopped. Then this strange nonsense text ended the clip. As little Kevin completed his mission, he looked to him and smiled. Then the video ended. Who the hell was he? What was the whole purpose of that video? Was it real? I threw my hard disk away in the rain through the window and replaced it the next day. I do not want anyone to see the video. If you ever find it, delete it immediately. It took me months to get over the horrible feeling of that smiling monster on the screen.
Born on February 11th of 1860, Karl Denke grew up as the son of a wealthy German farming couple in part of what is now modern-day Poland. Little is known of Karl's early years, but it seems he was a quiet and soft-spoken child who fared poorly in social situations. It's unclear why, but at just 12 years old, a young Karl left his childhood home, never to return. In nearby Münsterberg, he became an apprentice gardener for a while, but after deciding that outdoor work didn't suit him, he quit and worked a variety of odd jobs before receiving a sizable inheritance following his father's death. It was with this inheritance money that Karl purchased his first plot of land, having bizarrely decided to take up farming. As you can imagine, given the amount of outdoor work involved, Karl found that farming didn't suit him either. So he sold his land for considerably less than he paid for it, then continued working odd jobs around Münsterberg whilst living in a small house there. Karl did okay for himself. He was a popular figure in his local community and even played organ down at his local church. As a result of his staunch piety, generosity, and friendly demeanor, Karl was nicknamed Papa Denke by the local townsfolk, and he became something of a surrogate uncle for some of the town's more wayward youth. If you were in need of something to eat, go see Papa Denke. Need a bed for the night? Go see Papa Denke. Late on the rent? You get the idea. By age 66, Karl had become a pillar of the community. Everyone knew his name, everyone knew his face. There wasn't a soul in Münsterberg that didn't know his rosy red cheeks and wide, warm smile. But the same face that everyone had come to love so much, it was nothing but a mask. A mask Karl wore to hide his true nature. Papa Denke wasn't the man that everyone thought he was, and his mask was about to slip. It was the night of December 21st, 1924, just a few nights before Christmas, and befitting the time of year, Papa Denke's house was seeing increased traffic from the city's most vulnerable people. It was such a good service he provided, what with the streets being so dangerous. More and more of the homeless were going missing every year now, vanishing from the recesses they'd been banished to, never to reappear. Some said the last place their missing friend had been seen was Papa Denke's house. But that made all the sense in the world. He was a charitable man. Many of the homeless darkened his door on a nightly basis. Besides, such a man of faith wouldn't have it in him to hurt anyone, would he? But that same festively frosty December night, a passerby heard something as he walked past Papa Denke's house, something that made his blood run cold. It was the cry of a man who knew he was about to die, a kind of blood-curdling mortal lament, the final sound they might ever make. The passerby burst into Denke's house, terrified that the man himself might be under attack from one of the very people he was trying to help. But instead, the passerby quickly encountered a young vagrant, still on his feet for a moment, despite his head just about being cleaved in two. When asked who'd inflicted such a terrible wound, the dying man managed to utter two final words before he expired. Papa Denke. Realizing he had stumbled into the den of a sinister and surreptitious predator, the passerby immediately fled Denke's home, headed straight for the nearest police station. Once Denke had been arrested, a search of his house revealed the hidden identification papers of a dozen missing people, plus various items of male clothing that were so small they could be categorically ruled out as belonging to Denke. But by far the most disturbing and incriminating discovery was to be made in Papa Denka's kitchen. Police located 2 large vinegar barrels, each containing large chunks of what looked a lot like pork. Denka seemed to be in the process of pickling some gammon for the winter. At least, the police were hoping it was gammon. Yet when they discovered the butchered corpses of up to 30 of Denka's victims, it became clear the Münsterberg police had a cannibal on their hands. What's more, Denka had made the mistake of writing down the names and ages of his victims in a small notebook, along with the dates of their murders and the parts of their corpses he was pickling. The scope and scale of his operation was horrifyingly clear, and it's obvious that the pickling process was intended to allow Denka to savor his victims for months to come. But the questions of what made the man so deranged in the first place, and why he was compelled not to only kill, but consume the bodies of his victims, those police were anxious to answer. Unfortunately, they never got the chance, as Papa Denka would use a secreted handkerchief to hang himself in his cell on the very first night of his arrest. He was obviously deeply ashamed of his actions and was unable to face the backlash and consequence of those. But just how much Denka had to be ashamed of was only revealed after his death. It had turned out that not only had Papa Denka pickled and eaten his poor vagrant victims, he'd also fed other people their remains. The vast majority of the homeless folk who visited Papa Denka were given small jars of what he called pickled pork, small, highly nutritious chunks of protein that could last Münsterbergs hungry for a considerably long time. But it wasn't pork. It wasn't ever pork. Papa Denka, Münsterberg's happiest, holliest, friendliest citizen, had been feeding the homeless to each other, and had been doing it for years. Needless to say, it wasn't a very Merry Christmas that year in Münsterberg, not for those who knew the taste of Papa Denka's pickled pork. Around the time that I was 9 or 10 years old, my immediate family stopped paying visits to my maternal grandmother. I remember it taking me what seems like an unusual amount of time to figure out that we weren't seeing her anymore, and when I did, I just sort of didn't question it. I know that might sound very callous, but I think even though I was very young, I realized what a sensitive subject it was. At that age, it was inconceivable that I'd ever just stop talking to my mom. So I suppose the idea frightened me so much that I just compartmentalized it in a way that only kids seem able to. As I got older, I learned that they didn't talk anymore because they'd had a particularly vicious argument one day and simply decided not to see each other anymore. They hadn't had the best of relationships when my mom was a kid, but as much as there seemed to be a lot of backstory, I don't want to ask about it. It was all just so sad, and whenever she talked about it, the subject always had Mom on the verge of tears. And then as I got older, I started to feel a huge amount of contempt for my grandma because whatever the hell she'd done, it had left my mom heartbroken, and there was just no other word for it. I was more than happy to forget about a person that had hurt my mom that much, and it didn't matter one bit if she was a blood relative or not. But then one day, around Thanksgiving of 2017, Mom called me with some news. Grandma was dying, and if I wanted to see her before she passed, I'd have to do so that week or risk traveling up to her too late. Knowing she was on death's door changed a lot for me, and I strongly considered going to visit her in whatever home or hospice she was in. But then, when I asked where the place was, the answer that came back almost knocked me off my feet. For a start, I was actually kind of surprised that Grandma was even still alive. I'd considered the possibility that she'd passed and we simply hadn't heard about it, so knowing we had one last chance to make peace with her was definitely a big perspective changer. I asked Mom if she'd be heading up to visit Grandma, and when she said no, I asked where Grandma actually was. Mom paused and then said, "She's up in Burlington, at a place called Chittenden." The name didn't ring any bells for me, nor should it now that I think about it. I asked Mom if Chittenden was like the name of her residential home or something, and the reply came back word for word. "Chittenden RCF, honey. Your grandma is in prison." You know, sometimes people will ask you, are you sitting down, before they give you some crazy piece of bad news. I know why they ask that now, and I'm not saying I got anywhere close to passing out, but for a second or two, I completely retreated inside of myself. I couldn't think of a single word to say for what felt like a full 60 seconds. It was like a psychic bottleneck or something. 1,000 questions tried to get out at once, and as a result, not a single one made it out of my mouth. I briefly considered driving over to my mom's place so we could talk it out in person, as a conversation like that seemed too weighty for a phone call, but then I just couldn't wait. With each passing second, the curiosity burned brighter and brighter until all I could do was sit myself down on my couch, cradle my head in my hands, and over loudspeaker, ask my mom to tell me everything. Like I said, Mom had a pretty rough childhood, and Grandma was basically the root cause of it. I wouldn't go so far as to call her a psycho or anything, because honestly, that seems like an insult to psychos everywhere. Because according to Mom, Grandma's cruelty wasn't chaotic, it was calculated. I won't go into every little instance of abuse because we'd be here all day if so, and so instead, just take my word that she was quite possibly the worst mother I've ever heard of. Mom put up with it for years until she finally realized that just because it was her mom doing it didn't make it okay. This happened right around the time I was born too, because I guess it had her reflecting on what our relationship might be like. But then, surprisingly, Grandma at least attempted to change her ways. I guess she knew that if she didn't, there's no chance of her developing a relationship with her grandkids, and that change in her behavior meant that until my age was approaching double digits, we either visited her or she visited us at least once or twice a month. That one day, totally out of the blue, Mom gets a call from a man claiming to be Grandma's attorney. Grandma was in jail, and the charges were serious. Mom said she thought the charges might be DUI related, that maybe she'd hit a car driving drunk, or God forbid, maybe even hurt someone too. But regardless of the specifics, Mom starts asking the attorney about the whole bail process because she'd never had to bail anyone out of jail before. And that's when the attorney tells her that bail would be in the region of $500,000. Mom said she felt her stomach tying itself in knots when she heard that number, and it told her everything she needed to know about the severity of the crime. Grandma hadn't just been caught driving after one too many. Whatever she'd done, she was looking at a lengthy prison sentence for it. But what the hell could she have done to warrant such a punishment? When the answer came back, Mom said she had to pick her jaw up off the floor. It just didn't seem real. Grandma was being charged with 4 counts of solicitation to commit murder, 4 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, and 1 count of being an accessory to murder. Long story short, Grandma had been in a long-running dispute with one of her neighbors, some family of young professionals who had 2 young children. We never found out exactly what it was over, but instead of moving or building a higher fence or something, Grandma came up with a different kind of solution to the not-so-neighborly rivalry. She went on the internet and tried to hire a contract killer. I don't know if she just wasn't all that computer literate or it was just all the craziness coming out of her, but the story goes that Grandma plugged in how to hire a hitman into Google, and after an indeterminate period of time, she found herself exchanging emails with a man who claimed to run a secretive murder-for-hire business. Grandma was willing to blow the vast majority of her life savings in her attempt to hire a guy to kill her neighbors. Not just the 2 parents either. She wanted the whole family dead in as nasty and brutal a way as possible. Well, as it turns out, the person that she was talking to wasn't some killer for hire. Grandma had been talking to an undercover cop the whole time. I think if it were a movie, it might actually be kind of funny. The sweet old lady paying some mafia people to whack her neighbors over some dog poop. But the reality isn't funny at all, and it should give you an idea of how Grandma was actually the total opposite of a sweet old lady. She was psycho, probably with some severe but undiagnosed mental illness, but that's still no excuse for making my mom's life a living hell for the first 20 years of her life, and only then being barely tolerable once Mom had escaped her clutches. She was willing to pay a hell of a lot of money to ensure that the 2 children next door one of which was a literal infant at the time of her arrest, suffered unimaginable pain and suffering before they died, and all because of some bizarre perceived slight on her part, something the neighbors were barely aware that they'd done in the first place. I didn't go up to visit her, and about a month later, word filtered down to us that she'd passed away. Prison officials said her final words involved giving her possessions to an old cellmate. She made no mention of her family at all. Sometimes I think that if I had wanted to see her, she wouldn't even have recognized me. But that's okay, because I wouldn't have recognized her either, especially not after learning of the woman she truly was.
When I was a kid, my best friend's name was Sam. We lived only a few miles away from each other and would hang out all the time. I remember that many times I would go sleep over at his house, and he would also stay over at mine sometimes. Both of our houses were pretty average for the most part, although Sam's was a little bit nicer in my opinion, and it was also a little larger. This event I'm going to talk about took place when we were both 10 years old. Sam and I went to the same school, and one day, late in the school year, I went over to his house after classes. The plan was to sleep over, and I was excited about it. I brought my sleeping bag with, and would sleep on the floor of his bedroom. So after school, I went over to Sam's house, and we hung out for the rest of the day. I don't remember much, but I'm pretty sure we just played video games and stuff. We had to go to bed at probably like 10 or 11 p.m. So I set up my sleeping bag, and then Sam turned out all the lights and got into his bed. At his house, every single light was off, and I didn't really like that. In my bedroom at home, I always kept a small lamp on in the corner that gave a little bit of light, and before that, I would have a nightlight in the corner of my bedroom. I just didn't like things to be completely pitch black. I really could barely see anything, but I remember that Sam's bedroom door was open and there was a small light from something. I think it was maybe the thermostat. Anyways, I remember trying to fall asleep. Sam seemed to fall asleep pretty quick, but I didn't. I really wasn't that tired for some reason. I was lying there awake and eventually tried falling asleep, but after a while, I just couldn't. Sam's bedroom was towards the end of the hallway where the other bedrooms were. Everybody else in his family had long gone to sleep, and the house was completely silent. But then, I thought that I heard the sound of somebody walking. I thought maybe it was Sam's parents or something. It was very quiet, because basically the entire house was carpet. So it wasn't easy to hear the footsteps, but you still could, especially when it was this quiet. I looked over and then thought that I saw somebody coming into view. I could only see a small part of the hallway through the open bedroom door. But then, it seemed like somebody walked towards the doorway. It was so dark that I couldn't see very well, but I kept watching. Then, I saw much more clear, a man walking into the doorway of Sam's room. When I saw this, I realized that even though it was really dark, I could tell that it wasn't Sam's dad. I had no idea as to who it would be. I closed my eyes and didn't move a muscle. I was pretending to be asleep even though I wasn't. The man kept standing there for a little while. After probably like 30 seconds, I opened my eyes again and he was still there. He was just standing in the doorway and facing us. I couldn't completely tell if he was looking at me. I didn't move my head at all and just opened my eyes very carefully. I closed my eyes again and pretended to be asleep. I just hoped that the man wouldn't enter Sam's room. Then I heard the guy sort of walking away down the hallway. I really didn't know who this guy was or why he was here. I also didn't know if he was going to come back or not. As I laid there, I just kept closing my eyes and didn't move. During this time, I didn't really hear any more noises. I was really too scared to get up and wake Sam up or do anything else. Eventually, after I'm not even sure how long, I fell asleep. The next thing I knew, I was waking up and it was still dark out. Sam was tapping me on the shoulder telling me to wake up. After sitting up in my sleeping bag, I noticed that Sam's bedroom door was now closed. He then told me that there was a man in the house and the police were on the way. We were supposed to stay in his bedroom and not leave. Then we waited inside of Sam's bedroom and didn't really hear much. But after a while later, the police arrived and we continued to stay in the bedroom. After a long time, Sam's parents finally came and told us what happened. We found out that a man was located hiding in the basement. I guess he tried opening Sam's parents' bedroom and it woke both of them up. The man fled and Sam's parents called the cops. Then they knew that the man was at the other end of the house, and Sam woke up from the noise. He then left the bedroom to see what was going on, and when he returned, he woke me up. I guess it was the same man that I had seen. I'm really glad that the man didn't cause any harm. I never found out why he had entered, or how he had entered the house. I slept over at Sam's house multiple times after that. Luckily, nothing like that ever happened again. When I was 16 years old, I got my first job working at a department store. It wasn't my favorite job of all the ones that I've worked, but when I got it, I was very excited. Just being able to make money at 16 years old was really nice. I had recently got my driver's license, but I would have to earn enough money to buy a car. In the meantime, my parents would drive me to and from work. We did not have an extra car to spare for me to drive around. But it wasn't too big of a deal, because my parents could always get me to work for my shifts on time. Plus, we only lived about 10 minutes away from the store that I worked at. By my store, right across the street, was this McDonald's. Other than that, there wasn't much else in the immediate area. So one night, I was working pretty late until the store closed. After I got off of work, I saw a text from my mom saying she was picking up my little brother first. Then she would come a little bit later to get me. I didn't think it was that big of a deal. Maybe she would be there 20 minutes later. But the store that I was working at was closing, so I walked over to the McDonald's across the street. Like many other McDonald's, it was open late. I was also pretty hungry. Things looked quiet, and when I got inside, I saw that it was. There was one employee behind the counter, and nobody appeared to be eating inside. So I ordered something small, I don't remember what, and then I got it. I walked into the dining room, and that's when I noticed that there was actually one other person there. It was a man sitting at a booth in the corner, and he was kind of slouched over a little and reading a book. The guy had long straight hair and a goatee. I went and sat in another booth on the other side of the restaurant, by a window looking out to the parking lot. Then I texted my mom, and I told her that I would be waiting for her at the McDonald's. I sat there eating and going on my phone for the most part. My mom soon texted me back, letting me know that she would be there in about 10 minutes. I remember that I was sort of facing the other guy in the restaurant. Not directly, but he was somewhat in my vision if I looked to the right a little bit. When I did, I noticed that he appeared to be just staring at me, and he was staring at me for a really long time. This was kind of weird. I looked away and tried to ignore him. But sometime later, I looked back, and he was looking in my direction again. I didn't really know what he was doing, but it was kind of creeping me out a little bit. Several minutes went by, and I was hoping that my mom would get there soon. I didn't particularly like being alone in the restaurant with this guy, whoever he was. Then I noticed headlights in the parking lot and a car entering. It looked just like my mom's car, so I got up and started walking for the doors. I felt much better when I saw this. I walked out and left the McDonald's and started heading towards the car driving in the parking lot. But that's when I noticed that it wasn't actually my mom's. It was a very similar SUV to the one that my mom drove, same color and everything. But it wasn't quite the same model and probably not the same year either. I could tell that it was different, and I was really disappointed. And then the car ended up turning around and leaving. Meanwhile, as I stood there in the parking lot, I noticed the man leaving the McDonald's. He started just standing around, maybe 20 feet away from me. I wasn't looking at him, but it felt like he was looking at me. This was making me really uncomfortable, so I just started walking. I didn't really know where I was going to go, but I was just walking in the parking lot. There was literally just one car there. I'm not sure if it belonged to the man or to one of the McDonald's employees that was working. As I walked, I heard the man start to walk after me in the parking lot. I kept going, but I was now extremely nervous. Suddenly, I saw my mom. She was driving down the street, and within a few seconds, she entered the McDonald's parking lot. I quickly ran to the passenger side door and got inside. Then I closed it and locked it. My mom asked me who that man was. I told her that he was acting weird and kind of following me. Then he started walking back towards the entrance of McDonald's. We left after that. I feel so lucky that my mom showed up when she did, or else I don't know what I would have done. I'm not sure why that man was seemingly following me around, but it was really creepy.